Well, hi, friends, and welcome to Church Online again this weekend. And in place of a sermon, we're doing something a little different today. We're going to have a conversation with some friends. And those friends, which we'll introduce to you here in a moment, are Pastor Sean Davis, the pastor of Jesus is the Answer Church here in Spokane, and a good personal friend of mine, and Roger Powell, assistant coach with the Gonzaga University men's basketball team. And we'll also introduce Roger in just a moment. He also is a friend. And of course, sitting next to me, none other than our very own pastor.
Your best friend.
Pastor Michael. Yes, my best friend. All right. So one of the things that we want to do in this conversation is model for all of you what it looks like to have a conversation about race, about equity, about justice. And we just want to acknowledge right up front, it's an awkward, uncomfortable conversation sometimes. And we're going to come back to that thought in just a moment and explore that a little bit, why that's so. But first, I want you to hear from our two friends here and just get to know them a little bit. So I'm going to turn to Pastor Sean first. And Pastor Sean, everyone knows what I'm going to ask you. Tell us your story.
Well, my story is his story. I'm Pastor Sean Davis. I'm the senior pastor of Jesus the Answer Apostolic Church. Originally from Compton, California. Moved here to Spokane in 1994. So I've just celebrated 25 years in ministry.
Congratulations.
And, yep, a residence here in Spokane, Washington. And truly, this conversation and topic that we're going to be discussing again this afternoon, very needed, very necessary, and I'm grateful again for the invite to be able to be a part again of this conversation because the backdrop of where I come from is something again that we felt like we didn't have a voice, or either our voices was not being heard when it came down to racial and social injustice. So I'm grateful again that we're coming to a place in time where people are saying, let's talk, let's have these conversations. So I'm just glad to be here.
I do want to ask you, though, Pastor Sean, I know this story, and I want you just to give the short version of how you came to Jesus.
It's good. It's good.
It's a cool story.
Well, the truth of the story is I didn't come to Jesus. Jesus came to me.
Amen.
And I say that sincerely in the sense that growing up in Compton, California, you were pretty much born into an environment of crime, an environment of gang activities, drugs, prostitution. And being second to the youngest of nine, I found myself kind of being influenced by my even older brother, who was a part of the origination in 1969 of some of the gangs that formed themselves. And so from there, it was hard for me to try to stay focused on some of my athletic goals and trying to achieve, the level of success in football was my desire. But when you're living in poverty, sometimes the glamour of what you can make in the streets becomes, again, more attractive, than the struggle that you're seeing every day at your kitchen table. And you're opening cupboards, and there's nothing there, and you're doing what you can, again, to take care of your siblings. And so not making an excuse to going into a life, of crime, but for us, it became more of a survival. It became a way for us to be able to even make it to see that tomorrow because we're living still in a system that did not give us those opportunities. To be able to, be successful. And some people say, well, why do you do this and why do you do that? And my question is, why you won't give us a job? And so you want to prevent some of these things in a criminal aspect. But sometimes we don't want to look at the systems, that are preventing us from doing it in an honest way. And so, my life, went down that path. And at a young age, in two different incidents, I found myself, getting shot. And the one that I got shot in my back really affected my athletic ability because it hit me right off my spine. But it was a hollow point bullet that had exploded on the inside, and the fragments ruptured a lot of my organs. And so from there, doctors are saying your athletic career is over. You're done. And So from that, it just built up, I think, even a lot of anger, and emotions from there that just drove me even deeper, into that life. And so getting involved in that and accumulating material, wealth at a young age, 21 years to be exact, and having, multiple, homes or condominiums, cars. And here it is, you're thinking that you're on top of the world. But that was at the time that I got shot the second time, put me in the hospital, and I felt like it was God sitting me down, to help me to be able to see, that that's not what I created you for. So because of that, things started getting taken from me in the sense of even my own homeboys, were stealing things while I was hospitalized, and cars, being stripped and vandalized and stolen. And so all of that, I felt like knowing about God because of my father and family, but I really wasn't raised in church. And so I got to the place where I began to question God, in the sense of why is this happening to me? I didn't understand it. And so when I got back on my feet, I went to try to buy more drugs to try to get back on my feet. And in the process of doing that, the money that I was utilizing for that was then stolen. And there was something spiritually that began to happen. In other words, I felt like there was a lot of weight that was lifted off of my shoulders. So it was a feeling of like freedom that I never felt before. And I even began to laugh, like I was high or something. I just didn't understand what was even happening to me. And what God did is, before I had left town that weekend, I went to one of my friend's funeral. And there was a minister that I knew that had witnessed to me. And so he had wrote his church address on the obituary. So when I came back in town, which I wasn't planning to be back in town on that date, I saw the church address on the obituary. And I just said, God, if this is you, then, show me. Is this where you want me to go? And I went, and found this church. And from there, it was amazing to me because there was something happening to me that I didn't even or could not even explain sermon-wise, that I can't even recall the message. It was more of presence. And God's presence began to move on me in such a way, and I just broke down, and cried. And from there was just a cleansing that took place. And a lot of people that knew me were even shocked by it because it was almost like a 360-degree change. It was not a gradual, 6-month period of transitioning from that kind of life, to living a Christian life. It was like that morning there was a conversion, and I went back home and cleaned up house and pretty much walked away from that life from that day. So I'm just grateful, and I say that sincerely, that Jesus really found me. I didn't find him.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Pastor Sean. We're glad that he found you. Yes. Yeah. Sean and I have been friends for a number of years, and God is using you to do some great work here in Spokane with the public schools, in partnership with the police department. You've been a great voice, a great advocate in our community, and I thank you for your work. But I also just thank you for your friendship too, because you've mentored me in a number of ways. So I'm glad you got saved. I'm glad you got saved, Pastor Sean. Yeah. All right, Roger. Assistant basketball coach at GU for the last year. Yep. 6'9", 420 pounds.
I wish I was 6'9". I could have used those extra 3 inches.
Tell us your story, Roger.
All right. Well, excuse me if my voice is a little gone. We started workouts a couple days ago, and usually the first day it leaves. So I don't usually sound like this, but
that's coaching, right? You got to kind of get after them.
Yeah, I can't coach. Yeah, I can't coach with a small voice. You need a big voice.
Yeah, big voice. Yep.
But anyways, I'm from Joliet, Illinois. It's a suburb of Chicago, and this is my first year. I just spent a year in Spokane coaching with Coach Few and Gonzaga, and it's just been a great experience. But just to kind of give you a little background, I grew up in an area that was, it was at risk. It was, people say it was the hood, and I was really blessed to use basketball as an opportunity for me to not only, go to college, but, build a life for my family now. And, one of my favorite verses is Ephesians 3:20, where it says, God is able to do exceedingly and abundantly more than what you can ask or imagine. And, through the game of basketball, that is what happened in my life. Graduated high school, went to play college basketball at the University of Illinois, and ended up from there, going and playing with the Utah Jazz, and then I played a lot of years in Europe. And at the age of 28, I was in my prime, and I thought I was going to play until I was 35. I'm 37 now, and I've been coaching for 10 years. But God kind of came in and said, "Hey, I want you coaching in college." Yeah. And I did it, made the decision to coach, and now I've just finished my 10th year of coaching, and it's been great, man. Just seeing how the game of basketball has evolved in my life, and how God has used that to open doors and ultimately to give me influence and to give me a voice in the lives of young men.
Well, we'd love to hear how you came to know the Lord too. I know your nickname is the Rev. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, man. I got that my junior year in college.
Yeah. So how'd you come to Christ?
So, I grew up, I always had, I guess you would say, a God conscience. Now that I'm older and I'm able to understand the things of God a little better, it was God there protecting me and guiding me, and I didn't even know it. Like Pastor Sean, I grew up in an area where, it was dangerous. There was gangs and drugs, and to be honest, a lot of my family were involved in those things. So, that was a lifestyle that I saw, and to be honest, where I grew up, you're either a rapper or an athlete. And I guess I chose the athletic side, and but it was God protecting me, man. There were many situations where, there was gun shooting and, things where I literally could have been killed. Yeah. But God protected me, and I think as time went on and as I went through, high school, I think God used basketball to kind of keep me on the right path. Yeah. And I was blessed to have parents that, tried to shelter me a little bit also. But my junior year in college, I was playing at the University of Illinois, and, just like the Zags, we were really good. We won the Big Ten every year, and, I was riding high, and, everyone loved you on campus. And, God started really, really chasing after me. And not only did he chase after me, he kind of gave me a purpose and gave me a calling, and said, basically called me to preach the gospel. And in that time, I'm living life as an athlete in college, I didn't want to preach because I loved my life I was living. And I told God, I was like, God, I can't preach the way I'm living right now. Literally, we had a conversation like that. It was May 28, 2004, in my neighborhood at 12 in the morning. And I said, God, if you will give me the grace to change my life and stop doing the things I'm doing, and if you would give me that ability to do it, I'll serve you and I'll preach. And literally, I prayed that prayer that night. And the next day, I felt like God just totally changed me. And then that's when I began to just really get to know who he was, through reading the word. And I devoured scriptures. I stopped doing certain things. And my teammates at the time were like, "Oh, you'll be right back with us," and, not judging them, but, I had a God conscience, and I wanted to live a consecrated life. And after about 4 weeks, they were like, "Man, something really did happen to you." And they said, "We're going to call you the Rev." And that's kind of how I got that nickname. And, my senior year, we had a great season, and I kind of used that as an opportunity to share my faith. I got my ministry's license at the church I was going to. I started going to Bible college, and I was doing all that in conjunction with starting on the #1 team in the country. Wow. And God did a miraculous thing. We had so much success, and obviously the opportunity that I had to share my faith with the influence in the game of basketball, it was really cool. And then I made a decision my senior year, like I wasn't going to play professional basketball. I was going to go into the ministry, but with the advice of my advisors, my pastor, they were like, "Man, God has given you your ability. You should use it." And I was blessed, man, to be able to play professional. And I lived in Jerusalem, played there for a team in Jerusalem. I got to play a little bit with the Utah Jazz, being here, and obviously knowing how much people love the Jazz here because of Stockton is pretty cool. And then exceedingly abundantly more than what I can ask or imagine. Just God has kind of just guided me in everything, whether it's coaching, whether it was playing, like I literally have been using my life to glorify him. And that's what happened. And I'm not to say that, I haven't had challenges or, that I haven't, had to really press into God and God is still maturing me. But, I know I'm living life with a purpose, and that is using basketball to glorify him and to make disciples. So, yeah.
Thank you. So we got two revs here. Two revs in here. That's good. Yeah. Well, thank you both for being here and being willing to do this. I've been looking forward to this, having this conversation with you. One of the things I alluded to at the start is that oftentimes this people are kind of afraid to go here, to have a conversation about race or justice, or and particularly in today's kind of toxic culture, So it is a courageous conversation. And Pastor Sean, you told me once that courageous conversations are where we're willing to really listen to the other person, not to win an argument, but to understand what they're trying to say. So really lean in and listen. Yeah. And I want to have that kind of a courageous conversation with you, But I also want to ask you, kind of to start the conversation, is why do you think this is hard for people to talk about? And I'll ask you that too, Michael. I mean, we'll throw it out to all three of you. What do you think? What makes it hard?
Initially, I think wherever there's hurt and pain, I think it makes it hard, and I think there's a lot of people who are hurt, and I think when you have that, you don't want to offend people, and I think you kind of shrink away from it. Mm-hmm. But I think right now what's going on, I think is good because these conversations are being forced to have, and my desire, my prayer is that in that healing would take place, and in order for healing to take place, you got to have hard conversations.
Exactly. I want to kind of take it away from the racial side of that conversation. Just use kind of an analogy of in marriage, where, and husbands probably can resonate with this, that sometimes when the wife says we need to talk, it becomes uncomfortable right at that point. I mean, you could still be at work. It's like your whole mind is on when I get home, she wants to talk. So I'm using that even to say that, it's a natural feeling of being uncomfortable. Let's not make it a negative thing, where people say, oh, it just makes me uncomfortable. Well, it's natural. But the thing is, in order for us to kind of grow out of something, to grow into other things, sometimes we got to be made uncomfortable. In other words, clothes that I used to be able to fit in, I don't fit in them no more. I try to get back into them and they make me uncomfortable. If I'm going to fit into the time that I'm supposed to be living in, I got to be willing to take off some things and to be able to wear where I am. And so I get it. But another side that I really feel that this becomes a very hard subject when we talk about, again, race, is that people don't want to be falsely judged. So sometimes there's that cautiousness that if I get into that conversation, then people are going to think I'm racist. People are going to judge me. And I think we have to approach it in a way where we can create safe spaces for people to be able to be real and to be honest, where just because you have a different view of mine, it doesn't mean that I have to demonize you. It doesn't mean that you have to be the enemy. It should not be the us against them. In the diversity of how God created us, I think it's important that we celebrate that diversity even in different perspectives, not just in ethnicity. That I can celebrate the fact that you have a different view, and therefore we can learn from one another. But that's why I think it's called courageous conversation, because it's having the courage to be able to step in spaces that I already know, again, is going to make me uncomfortable. But my courage is saying that it's needful in order, again, for us to move forward. And I want to just add to what Pastor Joe mentioned earlier, is because I've been really sharing with a lot of groups right now that beyond the courage of conversation is the courage to listen, because we tend to listen again to prepare a response.
Yes.
And let's be honest, a lot of times people come to the conversation already armed.
Yes.
We come armed with data, we come armed with statistics, percentages, and we're ready to refute a person's view versus listening to understand their view.
Yeah.
And I think we need to kind of set environments where people can not just have the courageous conversation, but can you get to a place where you're ready to have courageous listening?
Yep.
That's the courage to let down my guards and to let down my upbringing, my grandfather's teaching, what we heard around our dinner table, because what I'm about to hear is probably going to challenge everything that I was raised with, and that's something that we tend to want to protect, you see. But at the same time, it also informs us, it educates us, as Maya Angelou said, in just being blunt with it, when I know better, I do better. And the reason why we've been not doing better is because I was uninformed or uneducated about certain things. The education helps me now to be able to now behave differently. That's why we have to have these conversations.
I'm listening to you talk, man. I 100%. And, I as a young black man and listening to you and knowing what you've been through, living longer, seeing things differently, it's an honor for me, to be able to hear you talk and learn from you, as well as, you too, Pastor Joe. But, one thing I thought about when you think about difficult conversations, I kind of thought back to like when I became a believer, when I got really repented, and even now, like in my life now, like I've had seasons where like, I had to repent of some things, and, sin was trying to hide. And when sin tries to hide, you get uncomfortable when you're exposed. You know what I'm saying? You get uncomfortable. And as long as you try to hold on to it and hide it, then that shame comes, and then you're running from God like they did in the garden. You're hiding, and it makes you really uncomfortable. But when the light comes in, and when you finally expose that sin, that's where true freedom is. But it takes that conviction of the Holy Spirit. It takes that, like you said, stripping of your clothes and say, God, here I am. I lay naked and bare before you. Deal with my sin. When you do that and the light comes in, it's awesome. But it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes some, brokenness to get to that point. And I think that's kind of where we are in this. It's sin. It's darkness. It's sin. It's unforgiveness. It's hatred. It's bitterness. But yet the light is trying to come in. And we have to have these conversations to let the light come in so that there can be true reconciliation, true freedom.
That's right.
So,
Michael, how about you? Do you are these difficult conversations for you, and why?
Yeah, whenever we talk about race, I think there's a level of uncomfortability for everyone because there's so much tension in our nation right now. And you don't want to be, like you said, you don't want to be falsely judged or accused of something that you're not doing. I think, like you said, they're incredibly important because if you look at Jesus, what did Jesus do? He always moved towards the people who were other. He always moved towards the people who were marginalized. He always moved towards the people who were pushed to the side, who were oppressed. He always moved to the people who were hurting. And I think that as Christians, we need to do the same, that we've got to be able to walk to someone who's different than us, who's on the outside of our society, who's marginalized, who's oppressed, and have a conversation with them. And by doing that, just by having the conversation, we're overcoming some of the things, not all of the things, but we're overcoming some of the distance that's being created in our society right now. And so I just think that what we fear is that, we've got to solve this in the conversation. And the very act of having the conversation with humility and grace is part of the solution. Right. And we don't have to, hammer out like, okay, what's the solution for racial injustice right here and right now? But just part of having the conversation together is we're doing that. We're overcoming some of that racial injustice by moving towards each other. And as we love one another with humility, listening to understand, not listening to win, I think that's when, if everyone in the nation started doing that, I think we'd start overcoming this a lot quicker. But as we stick to our sides and don't have the conversation, we're just going to continue to be divided. So I think the conversation is the starting place for overcoming racial injustice in our nation.
Can I add some, Michael, what you were saying, even that's the place, again, of overcoming. And I think it's important we see that it's the place where we finally become aware. See, a lot of times we don't even realize our biases, and we don't even realize that we have prejudices, towards certain people, or certain things or certain behaviors. And by moving in closer, to be able to have that conversation, I find out again something about myself that my intent probably was to find out something about you. But talking to you, I'm like, man, Sean, I found out something about me, which means what? I found out that I also was carrying, again, some biases towards, say, white people. So that's the great thing of overcoming it, is because now it becomes more of a heart thing than a mind thing. Like we take implicit bias classes, sometimes just to check the box, because, okay, I'm culturally competent because I took a class, but it didn't get here. It didn't change how I view people. It didn't change how I treat other people that's different from me. That awareness is huge. And I want to come back to what Roger was saying, too, in the conversation about when that light comes on, too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You just brought up the issue of implicit bias, something that I think everyone has. Every human being has biases. For example, I learned when I went to Kenya a few years ago, I realized that one of my biases I'd carried forever was that if you were poor, it's probably because you didn't work hard. And I went to Kenya and I saw people who were poorer than any I'd ever seen, who worked harder than anybody I'd ever seen. And I realized, oh, wow, I was wrong about that, So there are all kinds of biases we have. So what I want to ask, though, is specifically when it comes to race, I'm going to throw out kind of a big question here. I'm interested to hear what you say. How would you define racism? What is racism? And is everyone racist?
You talk about biases, man. Like I got to acknowledge my wife for a second.
All right.
She's fine, and I call her my angel, and and she has put up with me, and she has loved me, and I think as we've been married over time, God has given me more of an ability to love her more. But anyways, that was for you, sweetheart. But we grew up in the same neighborhood, like right down the street. And our neighborhood is it's the ghetto, and this beautiful woman, back then we both were young because we were around the same age. She lived right down. I never saw her. My block was next to the project, so it was bad. So her parents wouldn't let her come to my side. But anyways, so we grew up, man, and we end up going to the same high school and whatnot. And this woman, she's black and Mexican and Italian. Her dad's black, her mom's Mexican Italian. But anyways, she goes to Notre Dame, because of her academics. Yes. And you think to yourself, someone I'm black, and I was like, man, this beautiful woman lived in my neighborhood, and she got into Notre Dame on her own merit. You got to be an athlete or a rapper to get out of where I came from, right? But that's not true. You know what I'm saying? Here my wife is, going to Notre Dame because of her education and her brain. And I think, you think about that, and it happens. You think, oh, wow, you went to Notre Dame and you're from there? That's amazing. And I was like, and is that racism? To think that it's not possible when people don't even think that can happen. Maybe it is. You know what I'm saying? And it's just, I think people do it and you don't even know they're doing it. Yes. It's just that it just happens. It's a bias. It's what you expect from a certain individual because where they come from or the color of their skin. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know.
That's a great illustration, Roger. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Yeah, I really feel like it's born out of norms. And this is where, again, we also become uncomfortable because anything that is outside of my norms, in other words, what's been normal, again, in my community, what's been normal, in my family, is where we begin to place, again, rights and wrong. Because what's normal in our life has always been right. Yes. So anything that I see that's different from my norm, See, this is where I'm saying racism, in a sense, has to carry a form, again, of power and oppression against something that is different from you. Yeah. See, so we recognize the diversity of race, but racism, has to take on, again, a form, again, of power. So when we think about some of the things that have happened, again, to, say, African Americans in this country, and then we can say, well, are they then racist against whites? But let me just kind of open up a little different lens to that, because sometimes you got to recognize that they're still powerless. You see, because racism has to carry on a form and an ability to be able, again, to prevent you from becoming equal with me. See, that you cannot rise again to that place. So therefore, we have, again, the different water fountains. And then we have, again, where the colors got to go in the back of the restaurant. And get you. It was a institutional and systemic racism in a place to put a system in place to be able to make sure that you never rise to the level, of our equality. So I'm going to be bold and give an example when we talk about even racism in America's church. Because the thing is sometimes the white culture being a dominant culture, again, that's a norm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Come on, let's be honest. It's a norm, which means that you're in spaces, again, where you're used to seeing that. And then all of a sudden, there can be one, there can be two, maybe three. See, that enters into that space, and it's like, okay, that's acceptable, that's okay. But you let 10, you let 15. All of a sudden, that dominant culture start getting what? Uncomfortable. Why? Okay, now it's too many of them, you see? Because there's that feeling of, am I losing my power? Because I'm losing space. Yeah. See, it's like they're coming in. But let's take it even backwards to Jim Crow laws and what was called racial etiquette. So what it was saying is that blacks have to know how to behave around whites. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes in larger white churches, you'll find, again, that people who feel like they can come, but they have to behave, see, like us. So when you start expressing a black church culture that is responsive in nature, they too loud, Pastor Joe. It making too much noise. See, it's racial etiquette. Put them in their place. They can come in our spaces, but they have to behave, see, like whites. Jim Crow. So it's important that we bring that education back into the times now to find out that, man, here comes that awareness. I didn't even realize that we were operating that way. You see, because just as I'm saying it, somebody's probably checking their own heart and say, you know what, I did make that comment before. Because it's true. It's a bias that we don't not even aware. It just happens, you see. And sometimes in our community, we joke about it because sometimes it's like even going over to Idaho in certain places in Idaho and people are having to say, well, you go, because if 3 or 4 of us go, see, it's going to become a problem. Why do we have to be conscious of numbers? Why does 3 black people creates a problem? See, it's already embedded within our own fears, because that is how, again, that oppressive system, has treated us. If it's 4 in a car, okay, you getting pulled over definitely. It's too many of you. But it's happened the same way even in our churches.
Very interesting. Wow. So you used the phrase systemic racism. And thank you for that definition you just gave too, that racism fundamentally is beyond just the prejudice. There's a power dynamic involved that keeps somebody down. So how of our systems, what is systemic racism, and how do you think our systems, give some examples of ways that the system is stacked against a person of color?
Sure. Let's take it all the way back again to 1865, again, Abraham Lincoln, the freeing of the slaves. So here comes a declaration to pretty much rule out that it is inhumane and unlawful to be able to own, another person. And then knowing at that time that slavery economically, was a benefit to the white race. I'm talking about as far as wealth. Okay, so now you're touching my money. You're touching economics. You see, so now what they did, I'm gonna say, is through, you follow it, even Jim Crow laws, is that, well, prior to that, is that they started implementing again ways within 13th Amendment that yes, there's some freedom, but if you read it, it says there's an exception there that if a person is criminalized and found again to be convicted of a crime. So then it's almost like a light goes off again to especially our southern, slave owners that, okay, I can't own them as slaves, which means I can't get free labor out of them. Oh, but if I make them criminals, I can get them right back on my cotton fields. Yeah. So you start creating even like Jim Crow laws that simply said that a black person could not walk on the same sidewalk as a white person, that you were supposed to cross the street. You could not even express your disagreement with a white person. See, you always had to be inferior because they're superior. You always had to be submissive. These are things that now got you, again, into court, got you criminalized, and got you into the system. This is where mass incarceration began to take place because now we can create laws to put labels of them being criminals. And guess what? And you read it. It gets to the place where it's called leasing criminals. So now the slave owners who could no longer own slaves could lease the person from the prison to come right back on their cotton fields. And I can still get free labor, which means now I got to legalize slavery. They put it in a system, is what I'm saying, Pastor Joe. That's systemic racism. And sometimes today, a lot of people who are not racist may not realize that you're operating within a system that's racist. And sometimes I have to comfort, a lot of my white colleagues. It's not that we're saying you're racist, but can you acknowledge again that the system, redlining, housing, the system, voter suppression, all these things are put into systems in a way to be able to have power, influence, and oppress black and brown people. That's what I mean, that it's systemic, and it's sad because I'm going to deal with another fact, Joe, is when Reagan was in office, you're talking about a time, again, coming into that early 80, 81, where powder cocaine was a common drug for white people because it was an expensive drug. If you had it being black, it was entertainment, athletes, poor blacks couldn't afford it, okay? Until the 83s, 84, crack cocaine came in. It became the poor person's drug, the black community, the ghettos, the projects, okay? Reagan came in and they implemented a law, again, that criminalized people with possession of crack cocaine like 6 times longer than those who got caught with powder. You can have the same amount, but you will get less time with powder than you will with crack. You can't tell me that wasn't because of race. Because what was the dominant culture using the crack? Blacks. What was the dominant culture using the powder? Whites. So you put it in the law books, you put it in the system, and then you can sit back as a judge, as a prosecutor, you can sit back and say, I'm not racist. See, I'm not putting all the black and brown people in prison. Yeah. Your system is. Yeah. And you're operating within that very system that is perpetuating racism.
Man, that's really good. It's really informational for me as well, learning these things. But, I guess I would say my experience with systematic racism and oppression would be, the first time I saw dope and crack was in my older cousin's car. And he was a pretty big time leader, gang member, sold drugs. And since then, it was a long time ago, back in the 90s and whatnot, like his life has changed. And, I've had conversations with him. And he was kind of educating me on how this stuff happened. And, being a young kid in that type of a neighborhood, like I never saw a white person kill a black person. I never experienced that type of racism. I always saw, gun violence through gangs. People that I knew were killed by other blacks. Different gang. You were a different color. You sold drugs on this block. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I saw. But I had a conversation, I want to say about 3 years ago, and my older cousin, bless his heart, changed his life and became a pastor, was shot 6 times in the back, survived, moved away from where we were, came back and had a church in that same place. Wow. And I was having a conversation with all of them, and they were saying, hey, you know what? White men brought the guns to our communities. They brought the drugs to us, and we would meet with them, and they would give us loads of guns, give us drugs, and like the blacks in that environment would be the ones out there on the front line selling, getting shot, getting killed. Not saying it's okay, but this is what we saw. But then when it was time to give their cut of the money back, the white man that was rich, that you never saw, was the one they had to go meet with and give them the money. So these guys, these white businessmen, were funding drugs and guns in our community. And all we saw was people looked like us selling, shooting. And we thought, man, they're so bad. But it was funded by someone that didn't look like us. And thank God, I believe that guy that was doing it, it was a thing, he got arrested, and like the FBI came in and found him. But thank God that happened, because a lot of times that doesn't happen. And you see black men going to jail, getting shot, being killed by guns that have been funded by people that didn't look like them. So I think of racism, like that's racism. That's systematic racism. These guys getting away with murders that they're accrediting to blacks.
Exactly. Gentrification.
So let me just, for the sake of our listeners here, throw out a book recommendation. It's a book called Slavery by Another Name by David Blackman. I believe it was written in about 2014, and I think it might have won the Pulitzer Prize that year. And he traces, through all the Jim Crow laws, how just exactly what you were talking about, Pastor Sean, how they criminalized the most trivial activity, loitering. You could be arrested for loitering, pay a $5 fine. Oh, you don't have $5? Well, you can go to this prison and you can work it off. And of course, they ended up being there for years and sometimes dying there. Yeah. And not only in the cotton fields, but in major American corporations lease these convicts. Yeah. And use them. Anyway, all that's detailed in that book, and it's an excellent book. But let me push back on something, can I? We're having a good, courageous conversation. So I think I know some of my white friends would say, okay, we'll grant you, systemic racism, slavery, absolutely. Jim Crow laws, absolutely. But we've passed a lot of laws now that have made a lot of that stuff illegal. We've tried to change those policies. So what is still systemic about racism?
I like that. That's good, man. Good. You know what, man? That's a good question. What is still systemic? I'm not one to make excuses. I've seen a lot of black men and women who have worked their tails off and have overcome some of those things that have been placed. I mean, it's factual. It's happened, right?
Well, there are 2 of them sitting right here.
Yeah. And so I've seen people overcome it, and praise God. Because when you overcome it, it's our responsibility to go back and pull others up. But you can't discredit the fact that years of that stuff that has happened, it has put a damper on communities. And it has made it more difficult to overcome those obstacles. Now, with that being said, there are many white people that have had the same type of obstacles. There's many white people who have been poor, fatherless. It's not just a black thing. Sin, drugs, it's not racist. You know what I'm saying? We're acting like sin is racist. Sin doesn't care what color you are. Satan doesn't care what color you are. He wants to destroy your life. Yes. And I think that has happened. Yes. But from a systematic racism, I think that's the issue we're talking about. And that, it takes some effort to overcome. Yes. You know, to be honest, where I am today is not because of me. It's because of God. His mercy on my life. When I was 12 years old, I was at a house. There was a drive-by. I walked outside, opened the door, and there was a shotgun pointing right at me. I'm 12 years old. If he pulls that trigger, I'm not here. So God protected me. God gave me open doors. God gave me grace in some of the bad decisions I made. So I made it, but because of him. There are many more that didn't. So, you know, it's great that laws have been changed, but it still doesn't discredit the fact that there are many that have not had those opportunities. Maybe they weren't 6'6" and athletic like I was. So I think you got to look at that and not discredit the fact that sin doesn't discriminate. There's white people that have the same issues. It's not just a black thing. Drugs doesn't discriminate.
True, yeah. Good question, you know, first of all, too, because you hear the statements, you know, we've come a long ways, you know, yeah, we way past slavery and, you know, we need to leave that behind, you know, we need to move forward. And I'm going to kind of piggyback on using the correctional system as well as the judicial system that even I'm highlighting all the way back, again, even since 1865 and through the Jim Crow laws, to say that is there systemic racism? You're saying, you know, today with all the laws that have now ruled, you know, certain things unlawful. When you look at our system today, I was just looking at, I think it was 2015's statistics that talks about how African Americans are 13% of this population, but yet we are 40% in correctional systems. You cannot look at those numbers and not think that there's something wrong here systemically. Is that many people, you know, really out there committing crimes? Is that many people really out there, you know, doing things to deserve to be incarcerated? We have seen over and over again, that there has been racial motivation and over-policing in certain black and brown communities with the intent to be able, again, to even meet quotas. That there's been pressure, and there's too many documentaries that already come out to even prove this, pressure on law enforcement, you know what I mean, to be able to even do these things intentionally, to be able to feed those privatized prisons, because prison has become money. It's now corporation. It's the love of money. And so when I look at that, even through personal experience, I recognize again that no matter how far it seemed like we have come, at the end of the day, the system is still set in place to be able to allow our white dominant culture to be able to have accesses that I still will never have access to. Roger talked about even overcoming certain things, even as black people, and even yourself, again, and making it even to the league and NBA. LeBron James came out and expressed even in some things that happened to him, and even the word nigger being painted on his house. And he said, you know, I realize that no matter how much money I make, at the end of the day, I'm still black. At the end of the day, I'm still a nigger. And it's sad in the sense that we have those individuals that have navigated through that form, again, of systemic racism and oppression and have made it. But when they take off that educational road, when they take off, again, that successful road, at the end of the day, they're still treated like you're second class. You're still beneath us. I had this conversation with a black police officer, and his statement was, when I have my uniform on, see, there's a different level of acceptance. He said, I'm not scared again, of, even talking about right now, the protesters. And he said, Pastor Sean, what I'm really scared of is that when I go home and take off this uniform, other white cops don't even see me no more as being like one of them. I'm a black man. And he was only saying this in a sense of saying that I understand the struggle, I understand the pain, because regardless of my so-called success, see, this system is still designed to be able to kind of put me back in my place, as a black man. So, yes, there's some laws that have, been put in place, again, to try to prevent some of these things from happening. But when we follow, again, the data, school systems also, we find out that there's still disparities. There is still marginalized people, housing. It's still happening to this very day. We just talked about it even last week, that there's people still finding what they call racial
Covenants.
In the very deeds of their houses that contractors put in there when they built certain communities right here in Spokane, that tells them that if you sell this house, you cannot sell it again to anybody that's non-white. So yes, I'm grateful to say, we're talking about, where we've come, but just because we had a black president don't mean we're post-racism. Wow. We are still dealing with it to this very day, and we need to talk about it. So can I just add something, because you said something earlier about the light, and God had me actually minister on this from actually John chapter 3. And the Lord began to speak to me even in praying about the times and what's happening in our nation. And the scripture says that this is the condemnation. In other words, this is the reason of the judgment. He said, light has entered into the world. And he said, men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. So I'm not ashamed to admit that I was raised in poverty and raised at a time where when the light came on, roaches scattered. What we're seeing today, there's a light that is being shined upon all of the systemic racism that's been happening. And what God is saying is that I'm turning on the light to where you can no longer run and hide. That's why you find corporations. That's why you find governments, Mississippi taking the Confederacy out of the state flag. Things that you've never seen happen before in no other movement. You're seeing it today. Why? Because God is saying, I'm turning on the light. The roaches are scattering. God is bringing his own reform, his own restoration. The light is on. And things, again, that we've had the privilege to ignore, to say it don't exist, our companies not racist. See, the light is turned on all these corporations. And now all of a sudden they're changing policies. Now all of a sudden they're hiring, diversity and equity and inclusion represent a position you never had in your company for 50 years. All of a sudden you just created a position in 2020. Why? The light is on. See, you can no longer hide in the darkness. In darkness, you had the privilege to hide this stuff. And God's saying no. He said, Sean, this is why the judgment is coming. He said, this is why the condemnation is coming. He said, because I turned on the light in America to show America its ugliest and its original sin that has never been acknowledged.
Wow, that's good. Thank you. Now, you did kind of lob me a softball there, Pastor Sean. So, you brought up the Mississippi and the Confederate flag and everything. And, of course, right now, one of the things that's happening is, statues are being toppled and the Confederate flag's being torn down. And of course, there are people that say, oh, that's our history. We should remember that. And other people say, well, that's glorifying racism, and that should be. So tell us, either of you, both of you, what do you think about that? What about this whole idea of, the Washington Redskins are changing their name? And so what do you think about all that?
I've had those conversations, multiple times, to be honest with you, because there's a lot of good white people, who are coming to the defense of the Confederate flag and placing it again to doing away with history, and grandfathers that have fought, in the Civil War, and I get that. My father, fought in multiple wars, And so I understand the importance of honoring, especially when there has been blood shed and life taken. But in my conversations that I had, even not just recently, was to be able to kind of paint a picture to, as I say, help get it here, than just here.
Yeah.
So because we can debate over, whether or not the Civil War was over, race and slavery, and you have that debate, that is out there. But sometimes you can't debate, lived experiences.
Yep.
And what people really suffered from and what they had to go through. And so I attempted to just paint the picture where the question about why are we taking down these monuments, generally, and why are we taking down all of these, military, heroes and soldiers. And so my presentation was simply to make it personal. And I'm asking again this individual that if your mother was raped and beaten by a certain individual and eventually murdered, okay? And your city decided to actually honor this person because of other military achievements. And they decided to put up a statue in honor of this individual. But yet you as a victim have to ride down your street and you have to look at that statue of a person that raped, beat, and murdered your mother. Because this was a person who was defending it. This was a person who was saying that, Sean, I don't think that this is right. But when I gave her that analogy, not a full tear, but you can see her eyes started watering up. And that told me right there, I bypassed the mind now. And I got to the heart. To where finally she was able to realize, I wouldn't like that. And I said, well, you think about what happened to black mothers who were beaten, who were raped. You think about the separation and the division of turning them against the black man.
Yeah.
The Willie Lynch letters that actually taught the Southern slaves how to create a submissiveness of your slave, especially the black male, by bringing all the women out and bringing the strongest black man out in front of the women, and to tie his arms and his feet to two horses, and then spank the horses so that they're running opposite directions and split that black man open in front of the women. Because what he was saying is, I want to show you, what your black man is worth. So I'm trying to create a disrespect even between the black woman and the black man. Divide and conquer.
Yeah. Oh.
And then for you to put up a statue for me to see that individual, every day I go into courtrooms, even on our military bases. And that's the history that you want me to celebrate. That's the history you want me to honor. In that conversation, it really transformed
Oh, yeah.
her thinking about it
Yeah.
to recognize, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
And just listening to you share that. Wow. I think about the value of having, someone who is older and who has lived longer than I have sit there and educate me on some of these issues. And I think that's a big deal. I think black men and fathers educating the younger black males, not only black, but also white.
Oh, yeah.
White men
Yeah.
educating their younger sons. Because when you talk like that and I'm listening, I'm like, this is the education we need. Exactly. And this we need to pass down to our younger kids. That's right. Like, we need this. Exactly. And I think, and you think about the light and you think about what's going on, more of these conversations, like, that is what's going to produce change. Exactly. And to talk about like the Confederate flag, when I see a Confederate flag, to be honest, I get fearful. When I see someone driving around with a Confederate flag, it does something to me. I'm like, okay, they are probably racist. I feel like they're making a statement that they don't like me. And out there, like we lived in Nashville, and we would drive from Nashville to Disney, and we would be driving to Florida, and there's this huge Confederate flag, huge. I mean, it's huge, and like every time we see it, my wife and I'd be like, wow, we better not stop for gas in that area. So when I think about Confederate flags, I think about it makes a statement, and it really affects us. It affects. And maybe some people may think it's more for history, which, okay, that's great. I understand our history is important, but it affects black people when they see huge Confederate flags. And the majority of the people, that are not in the South or even in the South, majority of people that ride around in a truck with a big old Confederate flag in the back, they're making a statement. And it's not about history. It's about, I don't like you.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Those are great answers to an awkward question. Yeah. But it's a question that's being asked right now. People are talking about it, so thank you.
And I think it's so good to hear how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Because too often we can disagree about what it's about, right? But you've been saying you got to move it from here to here.
Yeah.
It's a heart issue, and as a human being, and especially as Christians, we want to make every effort to keep the unity that we have from the bond of the Spirit, from the bond of peace. And so, the way that we need to do that is by knowing what's actually going on in here. When I say something, how does it make you feel?
Yeah.
And when I post something, how does it make you feel? Instead of just trying to make my point, we need to make peace with people. And I think too often we get stuck on our point, and we think about ourselves. Even when I'm rambling a little bit here, but even when we can cut this, when we're talking about systemic racism, and you told that story of the man being pulled apart.
Oh boy.
It's repulsive, it's gross, and then as a white person, I start to feel like, do you maybe not like me because he was white and I'm white? Is there something, and I start making it about myself. And I think as in this conversation, we need to have the courage to not make it about ourselves. Yeah. We need to have the humility to say, this is a much bigger issue than me. Yes. And we're not pointing fingers at each other, but we're trying to point fingers at a problem, identify it, and then move towards a solution with each other. And so that to me was something that, like, right in that moment, I was like, I just felt this overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And do you not like me because of that? And I was like, this isn't about me. This is about us coming together and recognizing, here's what's happened. How can we come together and overcome this?
That's good.
I think it's so important when we think of education. And this is important, I think. When you think of, like, children, like, racism, you're not born racist.
No.
Like, you're not. Little kids love each other.
Yes.
It's something that is taught.
Yep.
Like a little white boy is not going to walk down the street and be scared because he's a little black boy.
No.
He's going to run to that black boy. They're going to play. Mm-hmm. They're going to have a good old time, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Racism is taught.
Yes. Yep.
It's the conversations that are had at the dinner table. Like, that stuff's taught. Mm-hmm. And like, this is just kind of off the cuff, but I watched Harriet. It's a new movie that's out. If you haven't seen Harriet, you need to watch it. Yeah. And it was about Harriet Tubman. And, like, there have been so many movies that have done such a good job to paint the picture of what happened. Like the story about, a black man being tied to a horse. Like, there are movies that have come out and that would give you a feel, and I'm sure it's probably not, 100% accurate sometimes, but it give you a feel of, like, what took place. I think white families should show their children these movies.
Yes.
They have to, because if they care and they show their kids, like, this is what that little black boy in the neighborhood that we drive through, this is what his ancestors had to go through. I think the younger generation would be like, this is not right.
Yeah.
And if they're educated, they will have a heart like you, and they will cut them to the heart,
Yep.
and it will change their views. But if we just skate over it, and if these young generations are not learning what happened, it's never going to be any change.
Yeah.
And if the fathers, going back to the fathers, which is so important, if the fathers are not teaching their families about this, how do we expect racism to end? It starts with the children.
Yes.
So I think educating them is huge. You know, you think about in white homes, talk about Harriet Tubman. Talk about how wrong racism is. Talk about what black people had to go through. So these younger kids will have a heart. Because racism, you're not born racist. It's taught.
Yeah, that's so true. In fact, I just throw in one quick little anecdote. Michael and I and our extended family were away on vacation a week ago, and so there were 8 adults and 8 little kids. And 2 of my grandsons are beautiful black boys. They are incredible. And but Michael's little 2-year-old daughter, Capri, could not keep her hands off her 13-year-old cousin, Zealand, all week long. I mean, she's on him in the hot tub. She's on him on the couch, you know, everywhere. And she just loves him, you know. And, and just to watch our grandkids play together, and particularly when I was watching her climb all over Zealand, I turned to my wife and I said, look at that. I said, racism is learned. You know, this is the natural reaction here. They're just family. They just love each other. And so it is important that we educate. Thank you. That's really, really good. I wanted to just, you said, you know, don't make it about yourself.
Yes.
Which we all do. That's our natural tendency, right? I make everything about me. But, so the phrase white privilege bothers a lot of white people. It bothered me for years. And the reason was because I made it about myself. And I thought, I grew up, you know, I didn't grow up with a lot of advantages. Our family was pretty poor, you know, and what privilege did I have? So I made it about me and I missed the point, right? And I was speaking a couple weeks ago in Pullman at a church, and we were talking about white privilege, and people could send in their comments. And a 15-year-old boy sent in this comment. I thought it was brilliant. He said, white privilege doesn't mean that your life wasn't hard. It means that your life wasn't hard because you were white. Yeah. And I thought that summarized it pretty well. So 15.
Wow.
He got it. Yeah, he got it. Yeah, that I have a friend, Keith Jenkins, who said, I get up every morning. He's a black pastor in the Portland area, and he says, I get up every morning and I have to think about my appointments, who I'm meeting with, and how I'm going to present myself as a black man in a white dominant culture. And I asked our church once, I said, have you ever woken up in the morning and thought about how you will fit in to a white culture today? And of course, all of us white people go, no, I've never thought about that one time. That's white privilege. Yeah. What do you guys think about that? What do you think about white privilege? Do you think is that covering it? Is it fire away?
No, you're right on it, and I have the same belief and conviction that, as you said, what the young man said, that your suffering, your hardships is not because of, again, your skin color. Yeah. So I'm gonna give it as a story.
Good.
Without naming, again, institutions, but right here in Spokane, my wife and I, this is now a year ago, Mother's Day, and let me preference that I'm in an interracial marriage. My wife is Caucasian, and I was going in here to purchase for her a Mother's Day gift, and when I came into the store, I'm the only one now, or second in line. I'm saying the person's at the counter already. And because they had, again, a lot of stuff, it took some time. And kind of a middle-aged, white lady is the one that is serving him and answering all of his questions. So I'm patiently waiting. And literally over a good 6-7 minutes, still waiting, only one in line. And then probably after that, maybe 7th or 8th minute, a white man and his daughter came up behind me in the line. And the white teller leaned over around the man that she was helping and then looked at him and said, "Sir, I'll be with you in a minute." And I've been standing there already, for like 7 minutes. Never acknowledged me being there. And then after she got done with him, I walk up to the counter, and I was trying to get a gift card. That's all it was. And I told her, what I needed, and she said, "Well, I'm going to have to type it in, to create the gift card." And I said, "It's okay, And then she said, "Well, I tell you what, can I help the gentleman behind you first, and then I'll do your card?" So my wife cried because it was her first experience for her to be able to see it for herself. That, see, I'm invisible to you. I don't matter to you. So I told her, no. With all the God in me, I'm trying not to be angry and express myself there. But I said, no. I said, you see me standing here waiting patiently for you to help the man in front of me. Now it's my turn. And you mean to tell me you want to help the man behind me? And the father behind me, you can tell, was offended just as much as I was. He was embarrassed by it. To recognize this is wrong. And only because I pushed back, she went on and served me. See? So that's today. It's not 400 years ago. That's today. And so this is how I express it, you guys, is in recognizing that this stuff have to be talked about. We have to have that conversation because it is still happening. It does still exist. But the thing is, and I'll be the first to say, we're not saying that all white people then are racist. But you have to be aware, again, of some of those racist acts that sometimes we're doing unintentionally. But because we're not aware of it, we're not educated about how this stuff impacts, certain black and brown communities. See, we don't realize that we're still practicing, this same form, again, of racism, Joe. So, but that's how I would respond to it.
Maybe I could use another analogy and tell me if I'm off on this one or not. But white privilege has to do with the fact that you grow up white in a white dominant culture, and so naturally, if you're part of the dominant culture, there's just natural favor, privilege, benefits that come from being part of that. To take it out of a racial realm, put it into something different. When I go to El Salvador to do some mission work down there, everybody there speaks Spanish. I do not speak Spanish. I am at a distinct disadvantage, And so there you'd say it's a Spanish dominant culture. So there's, you could say it's Spanish speaking privilege, right? In the sense that they all get that. And for me, I get up and struggle all day long because I don't speak Spanish. Yeah. So when we put out that phrase, white privilege, I keep telling people, don't make it about you. No one's saying that to say you're a bad person, you're a racist, or you need to feel guilty. It's just the reality that our culture is a white dominant culture, and that because of that, as a white person, you've grown up with, it's like a fish swimming in water. You don't even realize you're in the water. It's just the air you breathe, it's the world you live in. Just like if you were a Spanish speaker in El Salvador, you wouldn't think twice about it. It is what it is. But that leads to my next question, which is, what can we do to use our white privilege for good? And I want to kind of get to, positive stuff we can do. What can we do to help?
I'm going to share another story that I heard from Tony Evans. Wow. And actually my wife told me about it. And Tony Evans, I guess, was talking to his grandkids about everything that's going on and about white privilege. And he shared a story when he was working for a white family, and his job, and this was a while ago, a long time ago when Tony Evans is young. He's older now. He's written a lot of books, which I read. One of my favorite books is Kingdom Man, a great book. And there's another book called Raising Kingdom Kids that I'm reading now, my wife. So wise man, and I love reading his stuff. But anyway, so he was talking to his grandkids, and it was like, here's this grandpa who's black and lived in America, and he's educating his younger kids on how to navigate everything, that's going on. And he shared a story when he was working for a white family. His job was go to pick up the kids from school. And one particular time, like, the cop stopped him. And he was in a very nice neighborhood because the family he worked for, I guess, had like a lot of money. And the cop pulls him over, talks to him, whatever. And what are you doing here? I'm sure, got that whole spiel. And then the cop, and he told the cop the reason, he was like, hey, I'm going to pick up, my family's kid from school, and I'm going to be late. So the police officer knew that. He intentionally made him wait and made him late. So when the cop finally let him go, he got there, he was late, and I guess the family was like, hey, what happened? What's going on? How can this be? Little Johnny, I don't know the kid's name, got off of school this time, you're late. And, Tony at the time said, hey, this what happened. I got pulled over. The cop made me wait. Well, that family was very influential. And the dad went to the police and made a big stink about it. And I guess that never happened to Tony again, and, they used their white privilege to go speak out about what happened, and it brought change. So when you think about white privilege, which it is, there's a lot of privileges. Our privilege is being an athlete.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, I can open doors. If I don't use my privilege to create change, which I don't call it privilege, I call it God-given influence.
Yes.
And I think God holds me accountable to use my influence to help.
Yeah. Good.
To not only minister the gospel, but to bring change, to mentor. And, white privilege, like, hey, man, there's racism. White people have a voice.
Yes.
Speak out against it.
Yep.
Use your influence to bring change.
Yeah.
And I thought that story was a great example of how that can be done.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, on that same line too, Roger, again, in total agreement, how can, again, our white colleagues, again, come alongside of us? How can they address, again, these issues of injustice? And it is through not being silent about some of these things that we have been seeing and witnessing, using your privilege, because you're in the system, you tend to be more believable, you see. And sometimes when we see it and we go silent, you know what I mean, we can know that this, person of color is not going to be believed. And here it is, you saw the truth of what really happened. And this is why you hear protesters say silence is violence.
Yeah.
Because you're letting an injustice go right in front of your own eyes because you're afraid to speak out.
Yeah.
Scripturally, if I can add about Psalms 119, he said, the psalmist said, entrance of thy word giveth light, or it brings light. In other words, when you begin to become vocal about some of this injustice, you begin to shine light on things that I can't shine light on. Because coming from me is just another black man venting. See? God has given you a privilege to be able to speak this. Now, I shared a story with you guys, and it might be appropriate to bring it into to this question, is that, and many people have already watched this again across the nation, that on 4th of July, a young black man and his white friends were in Indiana going down again to a little campground and a lake that they wanted to go to, and not knowing that there were some white supremacist groups that was also meeting on those same campgrounds. And hearing a lot of their, chants of white power and just, hearing things that they were vocalizing, he felt, that maybe if I just go down there and talk with them, maybe if I have a conversation with them, maybe coming from a black man, they'll be able to see me in a different light. His white friends didn't walk down there with him. He went down there by himself. And then after, I don't know what it was, 5 minutes or something like that, they started hearing, like sounds of yelling and the white friends. And then they realized, we better go check on him. And when they finally got down there, they saw him, wrestling, fighting again with these white supremacist group. And then at the time, they had already pinned him up against a tree, and they were yelling for somebody to go get a rope. Let's create a noose, and we're going to hang this nigger. And so the white friends, totally outnumbered, and said that they pulled out their phones, and they started recording it. And they said, let him go, let him go. And they started telling them, you guys just leave. He said, you can leave, but the boy has to stay with us. So get this picture about privilege, because it was about 3 of them. And then you I don't know total, but you have all of these white supremacists, which means that if the other 3 was black, would they be telling them you could leave? Let's talk privilege. Right there, you had a white privilege to be able to walk away from danger because of your skin color. But the one black person had to remain. You can leave, but the boy has to stay with us. The courage of those 3 white individuals is what I applaud. Because what they were saying is, we're not leaving without him. We are going to keep recording. You need to let him go. They became vocal. See, they allowed their privilege to begin to change that situation. To where some of the other women, a part of the white supremacist group, finally realized this is wrong. The women start coming over to the men and saying, let him go, let him go, let him go. But the same women, before the other white people were saying let him go, they were supporting what was about to take place, a lynching in broad daylight. I'm using that story, and it's factual. It's on the news. You can look it up.
I looked it up.
That here it is, an example of using your privilege to bring change. A white voice that says, this is wrong. I'm going to speak out against it. I'm not going to walk away. I'm not going to go quiet. You need to stop it. You need to let him go. And because of that young man is alive today.
Thank you, Pastor Sean. That's a great story. Powerful. Well, change needs to happen on 2 different levels, I think. And, the one level is the systemic stuff, and that's addressing policy. And we need people to speak up and work for that. The other level, and the deeper level, is the heart change that needs to happen in all of us. And, I love the fact that you called it what it is, Roger. It's sin, Racism is sin. Our bias is sin. And we need to own that and repent and change. That is why we need Jesus, need to keep pointing people to Jesus, that, Jesus is the answer, Pastor Sean. And we need to keep pointing people that way. Yes. Hey guys, thank you so much for taking this time to have this conversation with us. And friends, those of you who are watching, let me just address you right now and say, we want to encourage you to have these kind of conversations in your home, in your family, with your friends. And it means dropping your defensiveness and not coming in saying, I've got some sacred territory here to protect, but I'm here as a learner. That's what a disciple of Jesus is. A disciple is a learner. And this is one of those areas where we need to come at it humbly as learners. And so we want to encourage you to do that. All right, would you join us as we pray? Father, thank you so much for this opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you for Pastor Sean, for Roger, for their honesty, for their insights, for their experiences that they shared with us. I learned a lot today. And I want to pray for everyone who's listening right now, Lord, that you would give us the courage to take an honest look inside our own hearts, acknowledge our own biases, be willing to repent of whatever sin of racism we may find there, or just, again, our biases, whatever it might be. And then help us to come at this subject as learners and to be humble, to be people who are willing to drop our defenses and hear other people's stories and learn and grow because of it. Jesus, help us to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And as followers of Christ, we really should be. We should be, Jesus, you came to reconcile us to God and to each other. Help us to be people like you, Lord, reconciling others to God and to each other. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thanks, everyone.